sound to my ears to hear everybody talking, whether it's about your interesting question on the table or what you did for fall break or Halloween or something even meatier than that. So thank you for connecting with each other. We are excited to have you today, and I'm sure, how many of you are here specifically for this topic? Raise your hand. Great. I am so excited to bring Emily here today with the help of recommendations from other people who have been involved in PIN for years. So Emily has been on my radar for a long time. So it's very exciting that she's here today. She flew in from Salt Lake City. So I wanted to remind you that there is coffee provided by Starbucks at Bellevue Square. I think many of you have gotten that. And we have a few little snacks there if you need a little pick-me-up throughout the session. Feel free to pop back there and get something. We wanted to thank our two platinum sponsors who are part of PIN, supporting our mission of educating, inspiring, and informing parents on topics related to education, youth-related issues, and parenting. And our sponsors are Happy Canyon Flowers and Chile Camps. So thanks to their participation and collaboration with us, we can keep doing the things that we're doing and offer things online, our podcast, of our recordings of our presentations. How many of y'all have ever looked at our website? Raise your hand. Awesome. There are a lot of resources on there. I recommend that you check it out. There is a QR code on your table. You can scan that, and it will open up our page. How many of you, go ahead and stand up. Stretch out your legs for a little bit, because you're going to be sitting, listening, scribbling notes, thinking hard. How many of you are here today because somebody personally invited you? Wonderful. How many of you are here because you read it in your school newsletter? How many of you are here because you happened to see one of our new yard signs in your school or in a neighborhood somewhere? How many of you are here because you got a direct email from us? You're on our email list. If you would like to get the direct emails from us, which also will have the podcast, the recording, go ahead and sign up in the back before you leave. How many of you are here because of the big Cherry Creek School District email that goes out like every 2 weeks? If I didn't hit your way that you got here, shout it out. Everybody's covered? Okay. Hooray. All right. How many of you have a perfectly peaceful home 100% of the time? Oh, Julie. Wonderful. As she shakes her head. How many of you have conflict between different age groups? Middle school to high school, parent to child. Anybody? Okay. How many of you have kids within like the same 2 to 3 years with conflict? How many of you have high schoolers? Whoosh! And therefore you are here. How many of you have middle schoolers? Absolutely, you are here in the right place. There's still some happy people in elementary school. How many happy people in elementary school? Yeah, enjoy what you can hold on to. I call those the honeymoon years. It gets into real life after that. How many of you have little people that you can pick them up and put them in their crib when there's conflict? Or tie them in their stroller? Those are really great times. Okay, how many of you have kids outside of the home? Yeah, it's a different kind of relationship and parenting experience. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. That will help our speaker. You may sit. I have a quote on my desk that I look at often. Conflict is the price we pay for a deeper level of intimacy. I want you to think about that for a minute. Conflict is the price we pay for a deeper level of intimacy. I believe that. My husband doesn't want to believe that. He's a conflict avoider. He's the oldest of 7 kids. I'm the middle of 3 girls. So, I don't know if you'll talk about that, Emily, but the role you are in your family might have something to do with how you view conflict in your life and how comfortable you are with conflict in your life. So today you're going to need to kind of broaden your mind. You're going to have to be real with yourself and hopefully with each other as we have little points of breakout and discussion. Emily comes to us today with a lot of experience in mediation, arbitration, working with teens. She has written a book. Julie, can you hold that book up if y'all want to turn around and look at it? Raising Mediators, How Smart Parents Use Mediation to Transform Conflict and Empower Their Children. How many of us want children who are empowered, who aren't scared about going out into the world, about standing up for themselves and what they believe to be right and true, and being their best person? All my kids are in their 20s, and it's very interesting how you start thinking about your kids the older they get and what you want for them. Today is my oldest child's first day of work. She's 28. She's had other days of work, but she just graduated from law school and passed the bar. And so this is her first day of work as a lawyer in Washington, D.C. So, there is hope for your kids getting out there and finding exactly what brings them to life. In that journey, they will encounter conflict 100,000%. It will be in their lives with their friends, with their roommates, with their work people, and with their intimate relationships. You already know that. You've been through a lot of life. So I welcome Emily to come and help us think about conflict as something not to put your head in the sand about, but to look at it in a different way and to embrace and to be ready to transform into connection. So welcome, Emily. And I want to tell you, we were having some kooky difficulties with our screen. We'll see how the presentation goes, so just hang on and be gracious.
All right, so already we've had to wing it. I'm guessing in your parenting, you've had to just adjust on the fly for what you're going to do. So I apologize for some of the formatting. We've, tried a new computer. We've done lots of things. Anyway, today I love the introduction, the idea that through conflict, we can create intimacy. Again, each of us come from different family backgrounds. We were raised perhaps to avoid certain issues, to compete on others. Entire families, even entire cultures may be taught to avoid, accommodate, compete. And we're going to talk about each of those styles. And I hope when we're talking that you'll think about your own kind of family dynamics, your own approach, not to shame yourself or to shame anyone in your family, but just to think more broadly about what tools are working for you in your family and what things you could try something different. I wanted to give a tiny bit of background because I think you'll understand why I went into conflict resolution a little bit better. So usually, give my credentials. I studied conflict resolution at DU at the University of Denver back in the day. My youngest was 3, and I had 5 children in 6 years. So I didn't plan to do that per se, but I know how it works. So I knew that there were going to be children coming. But I am in a lab. So I'm a PhD student right now. I'm studying intergenerational conflict. So I'm studying teens and parents and emerging adults with their parents. How you stay connected when there's differences in attitudes, lifestyles, and so forth. So there's a lot to learn. The main thing I'm looking at right now is, does empathy and perspective taking buffer connection? So, but from the child's perspective. Does the child have the ability to take the perspective of other people? And are there interventions that are possible to help kids when they encounter people from different mindsets? So you see, I worked BYU Law School, so Brigham Young University has a law school center for peace and conflict resolution. And on campus, I dealt with conflicts from all over the place. I triaged where conflicts go on campus. And at a school of 35,000, you can guess there's conflict. As good as we hope we are, that's just life. And I really appreciate in the introduction the idea that conflict will be part and parcel of your life for the rest of your life, and to not be afraid of it. So we're going to define, as we go along, a few things: what peace is, conflict, contention. And then I'm hoping by the end, you'll see and you'll have thought a little bit about how you and your family react to each other. And you're like, you know what? I keep trying to do this. Or I keep trying these methods and it doesn't work. But there's something else I could do. So if you walk away today with at least one thing, you're like, I'm just going to try it out. That I will feel successful if you come away with at least an idea of that. So questions. You may have, there's lots of different questions you could come here today. I don't know about you, but I would love more peace. I would love more peace inside myself, to have a better idea of I did the best I could, and to be a little bit more satisfied with what my efforts are, regardless of the outcome. I also is there anything that's not working? What can I what can I do better? What are some new approaches? Personally, I'm always again, when you study conflict, you're looking, there's lots of examples of it, but I'm always looking for something that might work a little better. Life is messy and you're going to mess up, but hopefully when you make a wrong turn in a relationship that matters to you, you reflect on it and then you try something different, right? So, and of course, I actually want this to be somewhat interactive at this point. So what's on your mind today? What do you hope to walk away with? What are there things that you hope that, again, you don't have to bare your soul in front of all these people, but are there any things that are on your mind that you'd like to talk about, or you'd like me to address? Yes. Okay. Different parenting approaches within the couple? Yeah. Okay. That definitely is a reality. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Becca. Anger management. Yes. 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 Anger is a reality, Julie. Yeah. Yes. And normalizing that conflict or argument may be part of it, but it's not the end, right? We live in a society where there are fractures and estrangement, so that can be a legitimate fear, right? Anything else? Yes. Oh, hello. It's so fun to see all these friendly faces. Okay. How to break cycles. Okay. How to change patterns. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, lots of patterns are intergenerational, right? I'm studying that. And I even realized, to understand myself, when I looked back 2 or 3 generations prior, I understood not only my own parents, but what I had inherited. And understanding can then breed what? Change. Then you bring it to light. Yes, Catherine.
Welcome home.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I think one thing is as a parent, maybe you and I, we have many kids, and
Mm-hmm.
how do we just address the problem as we getting older, learning from the oldest child, learning that from the first one and the number 4,
Mm-hmm.
then we learn. Oh, okay, we can still put the problem run. So right now, we want to address the problems and how to write out what's the number 4. I realize
Mm-hmm.
we did things wrong, and right now I want to say I respect the conflict. We did many things wrong, so I want to get back to when we got home.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I want to can we talk about things. They say no, I do not want to talk about that right now. I know that respect, but maybe we talk about it half hour later, and I get busy. I forgot.
Yes.
How do you when I want to
Apologize or, yeah.
revisit the issue again, busy life, and how to bring back the issue or conflict.
So not completely avoid it, but revisit it. Okay. I like to think, also there's parental progression, right? We focus so much on the child development, but you're developing at the same time, right? We're changing, hopefully for the better. Yes. I like that. Yeah. How to stand up and understand your own need without it being contentious, right? We live in a society right now, so everybody's standing up for their need, but they're doing it in a way that alienates the other person rather than creating connection. So in conflict, there's always the possibility to create connection because things are exposed. But again, how you address it is going to make a huge difference. So if there's any other thoughts, just keep those in your mind. If I don't address them specifically, I'm completely happy to talk with you afterwards. Again, we don't have hours. And that's the tricky part for me is, again, I've studied this for a long time. There's a lot of things I hope to empower you with. I can't address all of it. That's actually, and this is just a side note, I made 65 cents per copy on my book. But when I wrote it, I actually wrote it because when I was at the University of Denver, I have a background in international policy. And that's why I went to go study conflict resolution, nation states. But I had a 3-year-old at the same time I was studying. And I happened upon research in a child development journal, and a researcher in Canada, she was focused on teaching 3-year-olds. Again, I had a 3-year-old how to mediate, and her research demonstrated if a parent demonstrated good negotiation behavior, the children would imitate it. They didn't cognitively have the ability to analyze all the reasons why that was good, but just like with language, they copied the behavior of their parents. And then over time, they even showed that those kids would use the same tools of listening and sharing perspectives with their peers. So I thought, wow, why do I have to be 40 years old and suddenly have to learn how to negotiate? Why didn't I learn that when I was much younger, right? So I thought, if you come to my house, it's not like we're perfect practitioners, but there's at least a hope of doing something a little different than what we grew up with. So launching in. Sorry, I thought we just had Halloween. So I wanted you to see the 5th child is not there yet, but some of you knew me when I was in this stage, okay? This is, Halloween long, long ago. I think it's 2009 or something. But this was sheer craziness. It was. I used to have a heart attack when I would look at my old videos and see, hear their voices and be like, no! I wanted these children. But I came to a point, I remember specifically, so that little guy in the gray, that's George, some of you know him, he was a holy terror for me. Honestly, when I found out I was having another boy after him, I started to panic. And then when another boy, I was like, I can't do it. I cannot do it. I can't go to the library. He runs out the the electric doors and he's gone. And it was just stress constantly. And I had a point where I remember I was like, I've never engaged with a person with his personality. Not only had I never had a toddler like him, but I didn't understand his personality. And I don't know if you feel that way sometimes with your children, where there's certain personalities you gravitate towards, and others you're like, I just don't get the wiring. Like, I'm trying these different things, and their reactions are so different from anyone else I've met, I don't know what to do. So that was kind of my start of like, I feel like I like people, I get along with people, but I don't know how to parent this child. So if you have any of those feelings, I want you to just know, like, there's change. He actually is, I put the most, I look back now, he's 17, and I actually have such a strong connection with him, but we would sit, I mean, like, this is like day after day, hour after hour, and I've seen that time put in. It's not immediate, but there's this connection with him that's so deep. I understand him. I didn't understand people like him before he came into my life, but now I do. Does that make sense? So sometimes just because you're related, it doesn't mean that you know how to deal with this type of person, right? So what we're going to talk about, and there's parts of this I'm going to ask you questions, and some I'm just going to drill through, okay? So I'm going to define a few things for you. We're going to talk about what drives conflict in terms of theory, right? Like, and then development. It is so key that you understand where your child is at in development and that you understand yourself. The least studied area of human development, because that's my area, is 40 to 65. I thought that was really weird. Think about how many changes you as an adult are going through in these years of life, and that to understand this is a dynamic relationship between you and your children and your spouse, right? Because they're also going through, or your partner going through changes. And then we're going to talk about specific approaches. So, definitions. Because I study conflict, I actually don't think it's all bad. I think it's an opportunity. Conflict is a situation where two or more people have competing goals. But if you see in that definition up above, it says appearance also matters. Have you ever misjudged your children and their behavior and perceived a conflict that it wasn't actually a conflict? They have research of parents with their kids. And if parents almost always, if someone's fighting, again, this is more maybe younger kids, but they almost always have an immediate judgment, parents do, about who's at fault. And they walk in and they're like, you go to your room, hey, you saw, like, and we've already convicted and sentenced before talking. And so it's interesting, in this, again, this is just one research study, but when parents weren't sure who was at fault, then they listened to each child and tried to figure it out. So we have a tendency to want to judge quickly, so maybe it's not really a conflict, or maybe it's not what you think it is. So beware of appearances. There are legitimate conflicts. Some of them are real, some of them are not. We bump each other. If I'm walking down the street and I see Catherine, I'm on a busy street, and I happen to she's holding a coffee and I bump her, and she, has a little coffee spill on her. Does that mean she has to be violently angry with me? No. We bumped each other. Or if I share opinion and you don't have the same opinion, we could get angry about it, or we could just say, oh, you see the world differently than me. Does that make sense? Our world right now is so contentious because it's not okay that you have a different opinion than me, right? But we are going to bump each other all the time. That's just life. With your spouse, with your kids, with your coworkers. But contention is different. Contention is when you have perceived or real differences, but you have hostile or angry feelings about the differences. Does that make sense? So people may come into a situation, say you're, married into a family that argues loudly or debates loudly. That doesn't necessarily mean they all hate each other, but they may have a cultural norm of being really direct and kind of bantering, and then everybody's fine with it. But another person enters into that, and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys hate each other. Like, why do you talk to each other like that, right? So again, perception. Is this just a bump? Is this just something naturally that's happening? Or am I now weaponizing a difference that I perceive with you and I'm going to use it against you. I know that we're different, and I'm going to try to coerce you to do what I want, right? And I'm going to make it about our differences, that it's not okay that you're different from me. And I think all of us have experienced some of that contention. But every conflict doesn't need to be contentious. That's my point. Those are different. Conflict is ubiquitous. It's going to be ongoing for the rest of your life. You choose how you interpret the differences, whether it's going to be contentious. So, what do we conflict about? Identity. Talk about conflict in our society right now. Who are you? Is it okay that you're that or this? Power. If I have power, does that mean you don't have power? That's actually one of the most false dichotomies that we have in our society, is if you have privilege, that means I can't have as much. The whole idea is to create more of the pie, right? How we see it. Families would be the same, right? Oh, are you in charge? Are we both in charge? Do you get to choose? Do I get to choose? Just to think about how are power and privileges, how do you perceive them? Are they finite? If you have more, I have more, whatever it is. And ideas and values. And we're going to talk about, when we talk about the drivers of conflict, how there can be some, we need to differentiate between what may we perceive as a value difference, and maybe it's a method difference. Not to get into crazy stuff, but if you think about even in politics, most people want everyone to have good jobs. Most people want the poor and the needy to be taken care of. But how you do it may differ. But if I focus, like when I'm a mediator, when people come into my room, they sit there and they're fighting about the how. But when I get them to think about what the core is, they usually will agree. But it takes a while to get people to that point where they're just talking about the actual need instead of how to address the need. So again, we could talk for 2 hours just on that, but we won't. What kind of conflicts do you see besides these? What kind of conflicts are we dealing with in our daily lives, in our society? Any thoughts? Yeah. So, okay, we'll move into, and again, just be thinking about it, jot down notes. The main driver of conflict is that we perceive incompatible goals. You are too different from me for us ever to work together, and I'm going to try to get what I want, whether it's force, whatever, and to kind of help myself survive. So we perceive, again, it may be real, it may be perceived. And that's where you have to really be thoughtful and reflective. Think about within a family. You brought up the, parenting styles. Is my spouse really against me, or do they just have a different how with that same value? And to bring it to light, things when they're in the dark cannot be worked on. But to bring it to light and be like, you know what, or acknowledge the other person's goodwill. I know that you care about this too. I can see that we differ in our method, but let's try to brainstorm other ways to approach it. Again, a whole other topic, but incompatible goals. Are we truly incompatible? I brought up the political idea, but even in a family with, like, say, your teenager, sometimes independence versus security, those things are battling, but they may not be completely incompatible. So there's three main drivers of our goals that differ from each other. So one is we perceive scarcity. There's only so much toilet paper at Costco, and I'm going to get as much as I can, and I'm going to sell on Craigslist for exorbitant prices the diapers that I bought, and if you need them, you're going to have to pay for it, right? So I remember, I was living in Utah during COVID, and all the water bottles at Costco were gone. You could not get bottled water. And the governor actually had to come out and say, friends, people, we actually have clear running water in each home that you have. Like, the water is good, but the perception of scarcity drove a lot of crazy human behavior, right? So when we perceive scarcity, again, power, identity, values, some of those key areas we conflict about, we just go for it. And like, I got to grab as much as I can for myself. Doesn't always work very well, right? So just to be aware, that's a key driver. Incompatible values. How often do we say, even with people who may live close to us in our neighborhood, people within our home, they're just too different. I just don't get them. I don't want to hang out with that person. Or like a child, just be like, they're completely like in La La Land. We have no connection, right? But we think we're too different. So we have to be careful. Is it truly, and yes, there are values that are different, but is it truly a value, or is it something, or is it a how? Or is it like the method? So, and then incompatible roles. I put a referee and a coach there, because what's the coach's goal, usually with a team? To win and have their players treated fairly, right? And then the referee's job is, right, to make sure it's, fair and compatible, but that's a natural tension. A parent often wants security. You want to know your child's safe. You want to know that they're making good decisions, that they have a good future. And then when you battle a teenager, what do you think one of their main goals is? Independence. So there's a natural tension there. If you think about in a partner or a marriage relationship, there can be some natural tensions built in there. Especially, if like, who's like earning the most money, like you just have tensions built in. So instead of pretending like they don't exist, acknowledge it. Be like, I know you want autonomy. Like, I know you want to make your own decisions. I want you to grow in your ability to make decisions too. I'm concerned about X. Right? And then having a conversation. But instead of pretending like the tension doesn't exist, acknowledge it, right? And it doesn't have to be a shaming thing. It's just like, I see that we see this differently. Again, with that parenting style, like I see that you want our kids to learn how to act in the outside world. I'm really concerned that they're suffering, and I feel like I want to kind of cradle them and help them feel secure. Right? There can be those natural tensions in a parent relationship between parents. And then I wanted to quickly define peace. Again, I studied international policy. Oftentimes peace is described as no war. But I actually don't think it's just no war. I think peace has some substance. When you walk into a situation and there's some understanding or harmony. So I would say that peace has substance. It's not just the absence of conflict or war. And then what is connection? Sorry, somehow it did that. Connection is that feeling that we belong to this group. I think we all crave connection. I was laughing in the beginning of my studies last year. I had a class, and it was my professor was a primatologist. So we talked about primates a lot. And as we studied bonobos and chimpanzees, and I was studying their behavior with each other, it was really enforced in my mind that we are social creatures. And we're having to mend the isolation that we all went through for a long time. So there's going to be some effort that has to be put into not only creating the connection, but and then teaching it to other people how to create connection. If you have teenagers, I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's been some missing development pieces. How to interact with your peers in ways that are effective and normal, and not just zoning off into your computer or getting lost in the internet. So, again, I want to make sure okay. So do I have till 11? Or okay, good. I want to. If you're okay, you can leave whenever you need to. But I just want to make sure we cover these things. So, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Right, pretty much everyone has. Maslow is a famous psychologist. When he was a young man, he created Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what's at the top? Self-actualization. Self-actualization is what? I become who I was meant to be. right? Like I'm getting to like be the lawyer and start my first job and see what I can master the world. Nobody talks about Maslow's later hierarchy of needs. When he was older, he actually modified his hierarchy and added those three things: significance, that I matter in the world, that my personal life has effect in the world, that's significance. Aesthetic, he actually added beauty. I don't know if you've ever lived or worked in an environment that's super ugly and drab. I have. I put microchips. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and I was putting microchips in a little factory. You know, it was freezing, and it was gray, and it was hours long, 8 hours of that. It sucked my soul. So think about that. That he saw, it wasn't just a nice thing, it was actually a need for us to be kind of like for our soul to replenish. And then the last one I thought was, if you are a parent, perhaps you have thought about transcendence. I'm trying to help somebody else become who they were meant to be. To me, that is super striking. It's not all about me becoming who I was meant to be, but I'm now in a role to help somebody else become that. So I thought that was interesting that with more experience in life, that Maslow, kind of switched that was kind of the pinnacle achievement. It's tricky. Other people have their autonomy, and they may see their self-actualization in a different way, right? But that there's still that hope that you can help foster that in somebody else. So that's just something, when you're dealing with conflict, we connect when real needs are met consistently. If I need to get out of my social isolation, I could go have a weekend with friends, every 6 months. But it doesn't satisfy my daily need to have connection. So when our needs are met, you can feel connected, right? If my social need, my need for significance, my need to transcend or help contribute to the world, those things need to be met consistently. And then we conflict when our needs are not met. That's pretty simply put. If I'm mediating with people, I can usually see that their needs aren't being met, and they often come to me with their solution. I think this is how, if the other person did this, then my needs would be met. And I'm like, well, the other person might not see it like that, right? Like they might have different needs. So we have bring the need to light. And again, that's a whole other conversation, but bring the need to light. And then you can actually work on it and change things. So you're here, you want peace, you're hoping to help your families. Don't be too self-critical, but I want you to think, as I put up these 5 communication skills, I am hoping that you'll think about yourself first. You can think about your kids, which is good, but first think about your ability to do these things, because these are the 5, I see, essential skills to be able to resolve conflict effectively, not just within myself, but with other people. So I'm just going to put them all up. In your life, right now, can you share your own thoughts and feelings with other people that matter to you in your life without blame or accusation? If you can, when's the last time you had the opportunity to share what you really need and what you really feel and have someone actually listen to you? I think it's actually kind of rare that we actually feel completely listened to. You may understand what your needs are, but you may not have opportunity to share them in a way that feels connecting, okay? So again, if you can just think about yourself, your friends, your family, your spouse. Again, just to start, can I share need? Can you listen without interrupting and without thinking about how you're going to respond? Super tricky. When I'm mediating, the hardest thing is I'm having to take in fully what somebody's saying without immediately thinking about how I'm going to respond, right? Because we only can do one thing at a time. I'm taking a cognition class, and it's like very clear. We don't multitask. We focus on one thing at a time, and we may switch back and forth. When's the last time that someone listened to you without interrupting and without changing the conversation back to how they relate to what you were talking about? It's very common, and it's part of our conversations to kind of give and take and switch it back. Oh, well, I've experienced that. And then all of a sudden you're like, shoot, I only got to share a little bit of what was really going on inside of me. So again, starting with yourself. When's the last time I felt listened to and I wasn't interrupted and I actually got to the further steps of what's really going on inside of me? Not just the first question, but there's a third, fourth, fifth question to delve a little deeper. Asking thoughtful questions. I'm gonna call out Jenny's husband. So this is my friend Jenny, but I still remember this was almost 10 years ago. We went out to dinner, and I had been doing my master's program, and her husband Mike. It almost makes me cry because I was like, it stands out as a time I felt completely listened to. I was doing my master's program, and I think everybody asked me, like, tell me about your master's. So it was like one question and maybe a second one. And I remember this conversation because he asked probably 4 or 5 questions, and I got to really share what was going on and how it was changing my life. I still remember it. So again, it's really hard to give what you don't get. So as a parent, having that understanding that you have a need to be listened to and understood and to get it out. And then you have that energy to give to other people. So asking thoughtful questions can get you a little bit deeper to create more connection. And then this one's really tricky. Brainstorming without criticizing. When's the last time you had a conversation about how you were going to spend a vacation and you didn't immediately shoot down, your partner or spouse's or kids' ideas, and you're like, oh, that's dumb. I totally don't want to go there. Or you just we immediately, like the other person may be sharing a thought, or we're sharing a thought, and then there's criticism right away. We have to take time. If you bring the need up, if you actually are brave enough to bring up what you really want and what you really need, you need a little space to create options. And this is an area where we don't often take enough time to create options before we start evaluating. Again, just think about how you make decisions with your spouse or your partner, and also how you make decisions with your family. Do you bring up an idea and then everybody shoots it down and then you try to come up with another idea? Do you think the person who brought up the idea that got shot down is going to want to share lots more ideas? Probably not, right? So open it up for possibilities, but it takes a little restraint. One rule, no criticizing until we've exhausted options. That's it. That's not a lengthy list, right? And then this one, I think is a little tricky, making group-based decisions. If you think about your life right now, when's the last time you made a truly group-based decision? Sometimes people are unwilling. We were talking about parenting styles. Sometimes one spouse or one partner is not willing to make a decision, and it can be super frustrating, so the other person just makes a decision and moves forward, right? I had an experience, and I write about it in, I have a second book, but I wrote about a time when we were coming up with a family motto. My husband, I was like, are we a business? But anyway, it was a really smart idea, actually. So we were creating this motto for our family, like what we're about. And we have strong personalities, so it took about 3 years. Okay, sorry, not to be discouraging, but it took a long time. And I remember at the end, we were debating about the wording on this thing, and I was just like, because I didn't want to talk about it anymore, I was about to capitulate. I was just like, whatever, you choose your word. And my husband was so smart. He just said, if you give in right now and you don't really believe that, it's my motto, it's not our motto. And again, that makes me almost cry because I was like, I haven't had someone push back on me like that for my own benefit. Because he was like, we're a group. We're in such an individualized country and society, that we make so many decisions on our own, or we say, oh, the boss will make it. And then everybody's like kind of grumbling underneath and they're not happy about it. And so the decision doesn't even get launched because it's not really supported by everybody. So again, we don't have to do everything as a group, but think about some of the smaller things where you're like, you know what, that really should be, as a family, we should decide this together. So again, these are discussions. That's a whole discussion, just how to make group-based decisions. But just think about in your life, if you can pick out one thing, you're like, you know what, this same issue keeps coming around, and I keep deciding it, or my husband or my partner decides it, and it hasn't worked very well. This conflict keeps coming up. That's usually your I'm just a heads up. That's usually when you know your whatever you're using is not the appropriate tool. If that conflict keeps coming up, you got to try something else. So I wanted to talk to you briefly about child development milestones. I was in one of my classes at DU. We were studying. There was a book. It was community development, and they were studying. It was a town in western Massachusetts that had very high rates of child abuse. And what they discovered, the researchers went in, was that many of these young families, the parents, didn't have a good idea of what their children were really capable of doing at certain stages in their lives. Like they expected a 3-year-old to have self-regulation, to be able to control emotions. So they'd get super angry at their child when it wasn't really realistic. Does that make sense? So there's milestones for very young children, and then there's milestones for teenagers, right? Sometimes you're even revisiting some of the things that came up when they were 3 to 4, and you're seeing those same kinds of things as teenagers. But autonomy, how many times have you heard a little kid say, do self, I want to do it myself, right? And so you're scaffolding over time what the child's capable of doing. It's tricky because you may have a 16-year-old that thinks they can do it self, but they're not quite there yet, right? So you're having to kind of create this interesting balance, and you're going to mess up sometimes by overstepping autonomy, and then you may also mess up by giving too much autonomy. Does that make sense? So really understand, and we can't go over all the milestones, but I want you to think about that in terms of self-control, emotional regulation. Pro-social development means like I can think about the other people in my life. I'm not so self-centered that I actually can act on behalf of others. Like, oh, mom's really busy. I actually could help her carry in the groceries or whatever that is that you begin to see outside yourself. And perspective taking, empathy, and peer influence I brought up because my book and all the research was children would look to parents for conflict resolution styles, like to listen to them from 3 to about age 11. And then there's no research on parents teaching mediation to kids because it all turns to peer mediation, which I thought was interesting. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but there is a shift where kids, like older children, want to learn from their peers. So creating opportunities where they're learning in that way. Again, a whole other topic, but I want you to be aware of that. Adult development. And you may laugh at this, but I brought it up. What are you going through right now? Physically, emotionally, mentally. How are you changing? How are you balancing your own changes with the needs of other people? These are dynamic relationships. What I thought was so cool in my studies is like I'm figuring out in statistics how you can watch the parent and the child as they're fluctuating with each other and how that affects connection. These are dynamic relationships. So it's not just you coming here, I'm like, I need to know how to help my kids. Part of it is like, I need to know how to address what's going on inside of me so I can simultaneously address what's going on with my kids. Does that make sense? What I thought was interesting, and Julie brought this up in the beginning about, the fighting or arguing between parents. I thought it was interesting. There was a whole article talking about the kids know when the parents have resolved the conflicts between them, even if it's not super overt, but they perceive like, oh, did that have detrimental effect? And now my parents are less connected. But the idea of, like, sometimes you need to demonstrate that you're connected, like, as a relationship overtly, but if your kids perceive if there was this argument and then you've gone away and then you come back and you're more connected. I don't know if that makes sense, but there is research showing that, and you know it, if you want to self-improve, just ask your teenager what your faults are. Like, they know, and they know with such clarity. It's like brilliant. You could have like if you really want to know, be like, you stink at da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and this is how you act when, like, that takes a little bit of self-confidence, right? To listen to it. But if you want some feedback, you've probably got a good critic there. Quick question. What do you think kids usually fight about? Everything? Any other thought? Parents' attention. What? Property or space. Yes. Fairness. Holy cow, fairness. And certain ages, they think fairness is sameness, same treatment. And that's what becomes more nuanced as they get older. But like around age 10, fairness is you got this size piece, I got this same piece. And again, that's a developing brain, which is really important to understand. They will not always stay like that, but at that age, fairness is equal division of whatever it is, right? So, dun-da-da. At least from some of the research, someone broke the rules, like fairness. I didn't get what I want. Someone broke those. It also has to do with individual rights. Like even a small child, if you take their toy, I don't know if you ever did this, you're like, you need to learn how to share. And they're like, I don't want to, right? And they like start crying. They want ownership, even from a very young age, whether it's possessions or ideas. Like, this is my idea, right? That's in there. And then physical aggression, obviously, and then verbal aggression, right? Verbal aggression does not have to be loud. It can be very subtle and cutting, right? We know that. Boys and girls, they've done research, tend to do a little bit different in how they are aggressive, but it still can be aggressive. You are the parents. How do you usually respond when your kids are fighting? You don't have to confess. This is not a confessional. But how do you usually respond? Yelling? Yeah. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I remember I was doing a presentation, and the woman said, I make my kids go into another room and hug until they're not fighting. And I was like, what do you think they're actually doing in that other room? I was at Cottonwood Creek, and I was giving this presentation to a group of fourth graders, and I posed that question. All I said was, if you put an older kid and a younger kid into a room and they tell them like to stop fighting, what do you think? Who do you think wins? The older kid or the more powerful kid. It's like hands down, that's what happens if you leave it up to them. So hence the scaffolding, right? We don't, like, if you look at our adults, it's not like we automatically are so good at peaceful resolution, right? It has to be learned. So as parents, you actually have to actively teach your kids how to resolve conflict. And I'll bring up why I find that. So parents usually say in research that you should talk with your kids and you should like listen to them and help them work it out. That's what they always say. But research demonstrates we usually ignore it, or we judge the conflict, right? We're busy. We have lots of things on our mind. They're noisy. You're driving in a car and you're like, please be quiet. Just please be quiet, right? Like, I'm going to pull over and I'm not going until you stop fighting. So the kids may stop fighting for the moment, but have they really learned anything? Not much, right? Just that mom gets really teed off, like when I'm driving and you're like fighting. So ignoring or judging, they're not bad. At times, you should ignore certain conflicts. But if you do it every time, or you tell your kids, you guys go work it out, and they don't have the skills to work it out, the conflict is not going to get resolved. And I like to think of it, when you don't resolve conflict, it actually increases the intensity and the frequency of conflict coming back. That's just what happens. I like to think of it like, have you ever bought a new sleeping bag in one of those little the duffel bags, and you pull the drawstring? It's so perfectly fit in when you buy it. And then the next time you use it and you try to stick it in there, it doesn't fit, and then you end up breaking that string anyway, and you're like, dang it, like it's like spilling out. I think of conflict like that sleeping bag, right? Like it's spilled out, and you're like, I don't even know what to do with this anymore. So I already gave away the clues to this. How do kids resolve conflict without their parents' help? One child may give in, right? That's possible. There's no resolution. I would say this is the majority of what happens. And issue compromise. So they may compromise. People do. Kids do, for sure. And then they may, in their relationship, they may compromise and be like, okay, you can do this, right? So there is compromise. We know it happens. We know it's possible. But this is the statistic that when I saw it, when I was studying, was really sobering. Most, marital, parent-child, and most sibling conflict is not resolved. It's delayed or set aside. So if we delay it or set aside the conflict, it usually comes back in some other form. I think of it like, have you ever played that game like Whack-A-Mole, where you like the little gopher pops up and you're like smashing it down, and then it comes out in this other area. So again, you do not need to address with your full attention every conflict that's happening in your family. Absolutely not. Don't leave this meeting thinking that I'm telling you have to resolve every single thing that comes your way. But there are certain conflicts that you're experiencing right now that you may be ignoring or delaying on, and it will not necessarily go away because you're not attending to it. And it may be the thing that when it finally comes to the surface, it troubles you, it makes you want to cry, and you're like, I don't know what to do. Let's do something about those things. Not all these maybe these little conflicts are not the ones that matter, but I'm guessing, I'm just speaking for myself. I was up late last night dealing with family conflict. Like, there are things that I need to specifically address because they're not going to go away with my ignoring it. We know that, right? I assume that's why you're here. So, parenting styles. One of the other buffers that I put into my research for connection is parenting style. And just briefly, you've probably had a little bit of child development stuff throughout your lives, but they're categorized in 4 basic ways. Authoritative is high structure, high autonomy, and high warmth. There may be a little tension there, right? High structure, like we have family guidelines or principles, but I also have a strong value on your autonomy. I want you to be, as a child, to make decisions, but I have high warmth. Authoritarian is where there's high structure, low warmth. So this has been studied for a long time now, and there are times when maybe you want to, like, there's some coercion, but if you force certain things, you're also going to get certain results where people may go around your back. And we're going to talk about that with competing. The permissive is one of the saddest. I grew up with parents, wonderful parents. One had authoritarian parents. So my mom was very determined that she would not be telling her kids what to do because every aspect of her life was prescribed by her father. And then my father, he was raised by a pretty much uninvolved and permissive mother, yearning for recognition and love and security, even to this day. And I don't say that lightly. How you parent really matters. Your kids get to choose how they react to your parenting, but this is the long game. The jury is not, they're still deliberating, right? But if your parents know that you have certain standards but you have that warmth, you're likely to get a return. Does that make sense? Your kids may return to that. But if it's the standard plus If you like, the worst thing we can do, and again, this is a whole other topic, is when your kids don't do what you want and you withdraw your love. The research on that is super sobering. That's one of the worst things you can do, is withdraw your love. And sometimes we do it because we're so frustrated, we don't know what else to do. But when you withdraw your love, what do you think your child experiences? Right? Abandonment, loss of hope, right? You're an anchor, even if they're reacting against you. One small thing. I was reading a book about raising teenage girls. And my girls are great, but, we're just dealing with lots of things. And there's an analogy used that was so poignant. She said, parents, you are like the edge of the deep end of a swimming pool. Your kids go out in the deep end and they're having fun. And then when they run out of breath, they need something to hang on. And so you have those moments where they come to you and it's so intimate and you feel their love. And then once they've caught their breath, do you know what they do? They push on you and they go back in the middle, in the deep end. But I thought that if you can keep that in mind, that's a little bit what's going on. Like, Mom, I need to survive in the outside world. I need to find out who I am. But there are moments when I don't have, I have to catch my breath. I have to feel that security. So I'm going to cling to you. But the minute I start feeling like I'm too dependent, boom, I'm going to push on you. Anyway, I thought that was a really useful analogy. So that's, kind of parenting. I like this one. I tended to avoid, yes, go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I can tell you I just had this recent experience. I'm really disappointed. I know that what you're doing right now is not helping you to, get your work done. I know you're being distant with anyone who you could become friends with. I'm here for you, but in our house, it's not okay to do this. And it's not a one-time conversation. Like, I have to, after that, so my son just it's so hard for him to concentrate on his homework. He's like flipping back and forth between the internet and his homework because everything's online, which is just awful and so discouraging. But the other time, I came in again, I'm like, I can see, I'm like, he's on the internet again. And I was about to come in and chastise and be like, do your homework. I'm so tired of this. Because I've said stuff like that. And I saw he was watching just a funny meme, and the thought was build a relationship with him. So I sat and we just watched funny memes for a little while. So it's not all teaching, it's relationship building at the same time. It's probably a more complex question that can answer briefly, but there's teaching, but then there's not focusing always on the conflict, but focusing on the relationship at the same time. Does that make sense? I don't know if you're familiar with Leadership and Self-Deception or the Arbinger Institute. They have amazing materials, but their basic thing is if you have a conflict, the conflict is the top of the iceberg, and the bottom is the relationship. So I sit in classes with clinical psychologists, all these students. And so I ask them all my questions. I'm like, my kid's doing this. And then they tell me. But one of them, he said, his first question when parents come in with a child, he works with teenage boys specifically. He said, when's the last time that you sat down and played video games with your child? If you're super annoyed that your child is playing video games, and almost always the parents will say, never. I hate video games. I just want him to stop. And he said, do something with your child. Maybe it's not the video games, but build a relationship instead of always being correcting. Anyway, we can talk more after. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. The controls, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But do you think that he can tell I'm not really doing
Probably, right? Like, but again, you still, like, sometimes we think of like engagement, like it's like I'm engaged or I'm not. I trust or I don't trust. I think of it more of a spectrum. Like there are things that you're actually trying to build incrementally. But sincerity, I don't know about you. I had an experience when my oldest was in preschool, and it was very obvious that her little teacher didn't really care about her. She was saying all the right things, but my daughter could very well perceive that that teacher was super frustrated with her and just wanted her out of her classroom. Does that make sense? Like, so you can try to be a phony, but people read through it. Remember what I said about teenagers being your best critics? They spot you. So so be real. Be like, you know what? I really don't like video games. Is there any, maybe you don't say that, but like find some alternative. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. For like 2 hours. Yeah. Okay. Just one sec, Heather. And yeah. 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 That's not withdrawing love because you come back. That's de-escalating. Yeah. So in terms of defining, withdrawing love is when I have friends that their parents won't talk to them anymore because they don't approve of what they're doing, right? That's withdrawing love is like, I can't have a relationship with you until you do what I would like you to do. That's different. Heather, you had a comment, and then over there, yeah. Yes. 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 No, I agree. And that's the idea of a spectrum. Like, maybe it's like, this isn't my favorite thing, but the fact that I actually am sitting with you, trying to spend time with you, that's not lost, right? Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Comment. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think you asked about anger. What's interesting, we know about anger is we stop thinking, right? Like you actually can't think, you can't brainstorm options. But if you have a plan for when you're angry, you are going to get angry. Your kids will get angry, but if you have a plan for what you're going to do, then you have a way to act. So I love that you said, like, this is my plan when this happens. Instead of, I'm going to be so good, I'm going to be so patient, I'm never going to get mad. Sorry. Like, that's not reality, right? But you have, I even have a plan, like when I get angry, I actually tell myself to step back 3 steps. Because what do you naturally do when you get angry? You go towards and try to go above, and you try to get louder. So I actually make my voice softer, and I create more physical distance. It sounds weird. We don't talk about tactics very often, but anger is there's a physical reaction. So I have a physical plan for when I get angry. Anyway, have a plan. They say in natural disasters, the people that actually act have actually thought about what they would do in a natural disaster. Your natural disaster may be within your house. You're like, okay, when this happens again, I know this, because again, like, it's not like conflict suddenly gets swept under, like habits suddenly don't happen anymore. This is what I'm going to do, and hold yourself to it, right? Or have someone to help you hold yourself to it. So what happens when conflict, again, we already know it's the sleeping bag. It bottles out in some form or another. And it's not every conflict, again, that we need to address. But this is the core of what I want to help teach you today is, again, there's lots of ways to look at types of responses to conflict. This is just one of them that has resonated with me. So what are my options? I can avoid. And what I want you to notice over here is assertive simply means I'm trying to get what I want out of a situation. I'm trying to meet my own goals. And cooperative means I'm trying to help you get your goals. So with avoiding, and we're going to go through each of these separately, avoiding, I'm not really helping myself, and I'm not really helping you achieve your goals. It may be a pause. It may be reflection time. But I'm not engaging the conflict, okay? When I'm accommodating, I'm helping you get your goals. Oh, you want to be picked up at 12 tonight? Okay, like I wanted to sleep, but I love you and I know you have a party. I'm going to stay up so that I can pick you up from your party. I'm giving someone the gift of them getting what they want, okay? Compromising, we'll talk about this, is splitting. I'm giving up something that I want, partial. This is partial satisfaction of what you want. And compromise can be good, but if we spend all our time in the middle, we may be partially always getting what we want, and we're not collaborating to like really fix problems. We spend the least amount of time collaborating because it's the hardest, and then we'll talk about that. Competing is not necessarily bad. This is not like a throwdown in the fight, in a ring. Competing is simply, I'm trying to get what I want. There may be times that you need to compete, right? And maybe you've been accultured, I was, that if you're really a kind and generous person, you don't ever compete. But we'll talk about, there are situations where you probably should be competing if you're always avoiding or accommodating. You're probably not in balance in terms of getting your needs met. And then collaborating is where we take the time to have a conversation, to work through differences, so both people's needs are largely met, not just partially. There's a lot of emphasis on collaboration, and we'll talk about, again, like why. You should not be collaborating on every decision. Who's driving to school tomorrow? Who's doing the dishes? Like, there are things that you should just have worked out, and you have a plan. But if some conflict, again, this is your litmus test. If you have a big conflict and you've tried these other things and the conflict hasn't gone away, my guess is you haven't done this, right? Because it's time consuming and it demands a lot. So we're going to go through these one by one. And again, ask me questions, and forgive me if I'm like just going through them because I want to make sure we do. Avoiding is when we don't openly seek to satisfy our own needs or other people's needs. And it's legitimate. It's very useful in many situations, but you shouldn't be using it all the time. I actually was a church volunteer in Japan. And Japan, largely, it was expected that you would avoid or accommodate other people in conflict. That was, especially as a woman, that was what I was supposed to do. And you can see that it works in some situations, but if you use it all the time, you're probably not getting your needs met, right? I just said that. But that's like, again, if you identify more in this range, are there situations where you're avoiding, and especially in your close relationships, and your needs are not met? You're kind of just not engaging. So in terms of, we don't address the subject or the people involved. We may change the topic of conversation if it's uncomfortable. We stop responding or discussing issues. We may be non-committal and even end contact. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the United States, the rate of estrangement between family members is astonishing. People who just legit, I'm out. I don't like how you treat me. And again, there are situations where it's warranted. You know, you may be being verbally or emotionally or physically abused, and maybe you need to get out. But there are also situations where we're cutting people out of our lives that if we had a few more tools, we might not need to cut them out entirely. Does that make sense? We're getting to extremes, avoiding or competing when there's these other manners in between. Pros and cons. What do you think? How does avoiding help you in your life? Saves time. What else? Avoid a headache. You're like, I don't want to deal with this, right? What? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You're like, I just don't want to get into it right now. Any other things? Yeah, Heather. Yeah, just let that one kind of disappear. Any other? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It can diffuse conflict. Yes. Yeah, to reflect, right? I can't remember that you're up walking, but she was talking about when you're angry, like me avoiding it for the moment may allow reflection time, right? So there actually are a lot of, I think, pros. I lived in a very dangerous neighborhood in South Chicago, and I was laughing because I like to talk to people, but there was this one night I was walking home from campus. It was dark, and when I heard the heavy footsteps behind me, I wasn't about to turn around and say, hey, I'm Emily, how's it going? Like, we have a misunderstanding here. Like, I don't have money. I know you want money, like whatever. I ran, right? And I went through I had 3 security doors, and I was in my apartment, and I was good. If you are in immediate harm's way, even emotional abuse or whatever, it's okay to get yourself out. Get yourself to a safe space, right? So to avoid the risk of harm. And harm can come in a lot of different forms. This was brought up. It allows reflection time. Sometimes I've entered in, I don't know if you've ever been in especially like maybe with in-laws or like some family situation, you're like, I'm not going to go there right now. Like there's no point to this. Or this is not the right situation, right? And that shows your wisdom and your generosity of spirit to not bring up something. Perhaps it's something that maybe you need the time, or you can tell that your child or someone in your family they're just not ready to engage it. They may not even have the... Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, that's what sounds funny. Okay, this is the thing I love to say is like if I have a job, I have this whole plan. We have a budget, and I go through all this work to like kind of create like a system to how to address it. And then I go home to my most important relationships, and I'm just going to wing it. We'll see what happens. Right? And you're like, that seems weird, right? If you think about it, like, why don't I like observe my family for like even a week and be like, you know what? We're actually not fighting about everything. We're actually fighting about privileges or rights or fairness. So that's like, so take some time to observe. And that may be momentarily avoiding to collaborate, right? So these aren't mutually exclusive strategies. You actually can triage them. So what are the cons? If you avoid stuff, is there anything negative about avoiding? Tanuja, you brought up something of like, yeah. So it may escalate. Anything else? Yes. Yeah. Have you ever, I don't know if, I actually had to, again, be in my early 40s when I was like, I'm a faker. And like, but I don't feel, like in certain relationships, I don't feel any connection because what I've projected to other people is actually false. Because I do care, but I'm pretending like I don't. So I don't feel close to any of the people that I'm being a faker with. Does that make sense? So if you're always avoiding and you actually do care, if you don't care, that's one thing. But if you do care and you're pretending regularly, chronically in a close relationship, you're not going to feel connection, right? The point that, even why I'm here, the point is connection. We need it, and we need to know how to get it. Jenny? Kind of condoning it? Yes. Yeah, and that's tricky, right? Say you're arguing with a spouse and you don't like how they're parenting. Do you keep the peace with the spouse? Do you support the child? Like, anyway, there's choices that we make that they're not, this is tricky, right? It's not like there's this one size, this fits all situations. But again, sometimes we go into conflict knowing we're going to create more with the hope that we can resolve more of it. Okay, so sorry. Pros, we demonstrate compassion. The cons, I just wanted, again, there's a longer list on each side, but the things I wanted to emphasize were if it's chronic, you may be failing to meet your needs, right? Just generally speaking. And it can prevent real intimacy and attachment in your close relationships. Like if I go into a big family gathering, I don't need to like have a big political debate. I don't need to like stir the pot. But say with one person who keeps calling me out like every time and they like kind of dig into me and I'm like acting like it doesn't matter, but I now just avoid that person and I just try not to be around them at all, that's going to create a sense even in the group. It can be felt. Can't you feel it? When there's just like some tension, can't always pinpoint it. And avoiding may fuel the conflict. If it's something really important, you may need to address it. And again, remember this, like what I brought up in families, a lot of conflict is not resolved. So it's not that everything has to be addressed, but some does. So when should I avoid? So you're telling me pros and cons, but when should I actually use this strategy? Because it is a strategy. You're in a dangerous situation. It's totally okay to get out. I've even had, this sounds really silly, but if I know something's going to make me super angry, I may just be like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't go to that tonight. Like, I'm too tired, I have too much stuff, and for now, I'm not going to do it. But if it's an important relationship and I do that every time, then I may need to reconsider. So the issue isn't important to me. If it's something that it's not a big deal, why aren't you letting it go? Just like right with your kids, if you really think about the issues you have with each other, there may be stuff that you don't like. Like if I could, I would like burn up every video game and like the internet if I could. But just, I'm again giving some, but maybe not the whole thing. There's some balance there. And if I know I can't get what I want, say I'm in a situation like with someone in power over me, I can bring it up if I want, but there are times when I'm just like, I don't want to go there. It's not the right time. And if some situations are very complex, so it may just be something that at that time, just let it go, right? So again, I can't tell you I'm trying to teach you principles that then when you see it, you're like, oh, like with my child, like I'm really worried about the homework, but this other thing, it annoys me, but it's not the thing that I really want to address. I don't need to address all of it at once. Accommodating. This is when we give in what we want. Oh, you want to go out to dinner tonight? That's fine. Whatever it is. We don't address our own needs, but we give in to what other people want. And it differentiates from avoiding because we actually are actively giving to the other person. We're not just being silent or non-committal. We're actively saying, no, this. What I think is funny, though, is if you do this a lot, you may explode, too. They have a word for it. It's called obliger fatigue. I don't know if you've ever experienced obliger fatigue, but you've given so many times, and then someone asks you one more thing, and you're like it's just like too much, right? It's almost like holding your breath. If you are a person who regularly accommodates, you may expect that others would perceive your sacrifice and respond in kind. But people don't always do that. And so your gift, you may feel like it's being squashed. So if you do it too much with it's often a silent expectation, just beware that might cause obliger fatigue. Anyway, these came in differently, sorry. We'll just go through the pros and cons, and sorry for the formatting. The pros, if you are the person that always at the PTA meeting is like, I'll do it, or I'll go, if you're always accommodating, people, they love it. They're like, oh my gosh, she's so reliable. I love, Emily will do whatever I ask her or whatever. Like, it confirms an identity that you're awesome, right? That you're self-sacrificing, you're generous, right? And if your whole identity is wrapped up in confirming that, you may always accommodate, right? And again, there are certain even whole cultures built up around roles where that's what you're supposed to do. So it may keep the social structure flowing. Like, oh yeah, that's what you guys always do. It can confirm your nature. It may be required. I don't know if you've been in social settings where it's like, that's what you're going to do. You're going to say yes. I'm an apprentice right now. In a PhD program, my professor is my boss. I'm almost 50. I'm older than him. But I'm like, you want me to do that again? Okay, we'll do that again. Right? And there's sometimes it's a willing gift. And sometimes, there's a little bit but again, I'm expected to accommodate. And that's the role I'm playing. Cons, if I always give in, I may silently resent you. I may be expecting you to give back and you don't. And I maybe kind of distance myself, right? There's a lot of reactions to that. But it may alienate me because I'm expecting you, and I don't know about you. Can you feel when other people resent you? You don't even have to say anything. You can feel it. So you may think you're really sneaky, right? You're like, oh, I'm still smiling. It's like that preschool teacher. She was like, ah, and I'm like, you hate my child. I know you hate my child. But it was really obvious, right? She could not fake enough with all the niceties that she really didn't like my child, right? And she's fine. My child was annoying at that time, but she was crying and whatever. But it can be alienating, even without words. You do not even have to say anything, and people can sense it. So it may allow people to walk all over you. If you're always saying yes and you don't stick up for yourself, right? People are like, yes. I had a boss. I write about her. I actually pretend like it's someone else, but it's me. I lived in Chicago, and this boss, she had a nasty, turn to her. She'd say things to me about my coworker, and in the back of my mind, I was like, she's probably saying that about me, right? But I remember she came up to me. She had a new boyfriend, and I was about to get married. I was engaged, and she said, oh, I have the best boyfriend. He's a total pleaser, just like you. And I remember when she said it, I was like, that's a bad thing. It was the first time I was like, oh, a person, I was naive, and I didn't realize that she immediately recognized that I would say yes or like kind of give in, and that she was going to use that to her advantage. So again, like I like to be optimistic about human nature, but I like to also be wise about other people's intentions. So I had to learn to create a little bit of a boundary around myself. Does that make sense? So I'm thankful in retrospect that she told me I was a pleaser, because I had to work on it. When do you think, look, so ideal situations, because my formatting's a little off. When do you think you should accommodate? Like when does it make sense to give in to what other people want? Leighton. Yeah. Yeah. If the issue is not important to you, by all means, go for it. Give the gift, because it's low cost, right? You don't care. Any other times when you think like you should probably accommodate? Any other thoughts? Yes. Yeah. It's going to diffuse the conflict. Yeah. It's worth it to you. Like it matches your goals, right? You're like, I want this, or it's complex, right? So sometimes there's situations where you're probably not going to get what you want anyway. Like with my boss, like I read a paper yesterday. Like why not? Like that's kind of what's needed in the situation. I'm just going to do it. The outcomes, I don't really care. They're not important to me. It's not an issue that matters. Just go for it. And then the goal achievement, this is kind of what you were addressing. If I bring this up, it's going to alter, it's going to change or like affect our relationship too much, and we're not ready for that. Have you ever seen that? Like even with a child, you're like, this needs to be addressed, but it's not the right time to do it. Or the kid or the other person doesn't have the skills for you to really get into it. Does that make sense? So at the time, you may take the fall for it, but with the intention of later not avoiding it. Does that make sense? So that's where the triage, like you may accommodate at one point, but with the intention of collaborating or maybe even competing at a later stage. So you're using these interchangeably. Compromising. You're like, why does she have oranges? Oranges, I like to use this analogy because sometimes it's hard to explain. Compromise, we use it a lot in our culture, right? If you go to buy a car, what do you expect? 50-50, right? You're going to start high, I'm going to start low. Like we're going to do this whole game, and we're going to somehow meet in the middle, right? So I didn't really want to pay as much as you asked me, and you wanted me, anyway, we're going to 50-50. Even the math is really easy to split something in half. But the analogy I like to use is the oranges, and I didn't come up with this. Oh, hey, look, there's a little. So I needed this orange peel to make some muffins. And you're my roommate, and you actually just wanted to eat the orange inside. There's one orange on the table. So instead of having a 10-second conversation, like, hey, do you mind if I grate the orange to put into my muffin mix before you want to eat it, then both of us get what we want. Instead of having the 10-second conversation, we're like, I want that orange. And you're like, I was planning on eating the orange. And we just split it in the middle. So I get half of the orange rind that I needed, and I get this orange that I didn't really want to eat anyway, and you get half of the orange. Does that make sense? So compromise can be good, but if you're compromising all the time, you're probably not creating new patterns of interaction and connection that could really help you. So we satisfy partially what we want, and then we give up something that we want to resolve a conflict. And we often turn to compromise when collaboration fails. So the problem is if we always turn to compromise and we don't try to collaborate ever, okay? So we'll talk about this. Does that make sense in terms of what it is? So what do you think are the pros of compromising? Why would someone compromise? How is it a benefit to you? Yeah. No, there's not true, both people are kind of losers, but also winners too. Yeah. So it may create opportunity for something that you really want in the end. Like give up a little bit at that point, and then there's a better result. Any other things? How compromise? It's quick. How many times have with your kids where they're fighting about fairness and you're like, you take half, you take half. You have the computer for 10 minutes, you have it for 10 minutes, right? That's the quick judgment. Like you have to make something on the fly, so you do it. Yes. Well, it demonstrates like a respect that your need actually matters, even if I'm not going to give in wholly, but I'm still going to try to satisfy your need, right? Like I'm not just going to try to coerce you. An aside, think about in our society right now how much coercion we use with each other. Like you have to do it this way. If you don't do it this way, you're dumb, you're whatever, right? So compromise at least demonstrates some respect. So some of the pros, it's fast, it's efficient, it's culturally acceptable, right? Like everybody knows how to do it, and it's super easy, right? Give a kid $1, give me back 50 cents. Like people know how to do it. There's some cons to it. Can you think of any things that would be negative about compromising if you do it a lot? Perception of weakness, that you're like capitulating, that you're giving in right away. Anything else? Yeah, you're staying on the surface often. Like you're kind of unwilling to get into the depths, and that can, either side can feel difficult, right? If you're wanting connection or the other person's just like very quickly like, here, just take that, go away. Like I don't want to deal with it. So these are just a few. There's all kinds of nuances to this, but each party has to give up something when you compromise. You may only get part of what you want, and then if it's habitual, it may really reflect a lack of ability to connect, right? Like think about even, again, like in a marital or other partner relationship, if you're always just compromising and you never kind of get down to what's really going on, you might not feel super connected to that person, right? But you should be compromising on lots of things that don't matter that much to you. They matter. There's like a whole scale. I think it's Covey, Stephen Covey, who had he had recommended like between, this was for spouses, a scale of 1 to 10. Like if you're kind of like disagreeing about something, and you tell the other person how important it is to you. Like 10 is like, this is super important to me. And 1, this is not very important. So Leighton's example of the restaurant, like going to a restaurant, maybe you're at a 2, but maybe you're at a 6, right? And you're like, I'm actually like, I do kind of care. Instead of saying, you don't care. And then the next time the person says, we're going here. And you're like, do you remember last time? And you like kind of like guilt trip the other person, and like you did care. So be a little more overt about your need, right? So, and that can help with our kids too. Ideal conditions, and I'm going a little speedy now because I want to make sure. Oh shoot, it goes fast. I will wrap up at 11:15. We need quick resolution. Parties resist collaboration. Have you ever been with someone and you're like, I wish we could talk about this, but they absolutely refuse to engage? You got to have some way of addressing the differences. And sometimes this is the only way, right? But you've attempted the collaboration, and then you can't really get everything you want anyway. Competing. Sorry, again, the formatting's a little off, but competing, it's not meant to be that. I think you can see the G. Competing, which I didn't really know how to do, honestly. Like, I remember I was in I played soccer and all that stuff, but I did not translate advocating for my own needs very well into my closest relationships. Competing is when you seek to establish your goals and to get them. You clearly demonstrate that this is important to you and you want it, and then you're going to go for it. I put the civil rights movement up there because just because you compete doesn't mean you're aggressive or nasty. It just means you're firm, like this matters to me. I don't know if you've ever been in a family decision or a work decision, and the next day someone tries to renege on it. They're like, well, I don't really want to do that anymore. And you're like, we actually just spent 3 hours last night, and we came up with a decision. I'm going to hold you to it. We're going to do, so I'm competing with, I've collaborated with you, and now I'm going to compete to maintain the collaboration. Does that make sense? So there's situations where you may come into that. So I'm going to go over these ones pretty fast, because I think we know what competing is, but we may need to act quickly. And think about as a parent when your little child is about to run into the road. Do you sit there and deliberate with them or compromise? Yeah, you can take your bike up to 5 feet away from the street, but whatever. You may just go and grab them. There are times where you need to act decisively, and there's not time to deliberate, and you need to make a decision. Or someone totally disrespects you, and you have to maintain that you have value. I don't know if you've been in those situations, but there are moments where you may be accommodating and avoiding and even compromising your own character and your own needs in a way that is killing your soul. And you may need to be your own advocate. Or your child may be in that very same situation, and you need to advocate and compete with a system that may not care about your child. Just simply, and it doesn't mean you have to be hostile. You do not have to be contentious, but you need to be firm. And I have found situations where I'm so grateful that I finally learned how to do it. It didn't even feel like myself. I wrote a script, even when I've been in certain situations where I was like, no, that's not okay. I'm not okay with that. I'm not going to compromise on that, right? I don't do it all the time, but it was a needed addition to my repertoire of peacemaking skills, really. So, yes. So it's like you're playing the piano and you're just playing this one chord over and over again. There's no connection, right? But if you're a person who veers on the other side, you may need to create some boundaries, which is a little bit of competition. So the ideal conditions, you need to decide quickly. You have limited options. Sometimes there's nothing to lose by pushing. Have you ever complained about a service that was not done correctly? I had never done it until I took a class on persuasion. And my professor, I had no exams. I had to go and persuade people to do stuff for me. And I was like, this is really weird. But it was surprisingly fruitful. I don't remember. Oh, the approach is the message. Me competing, that's the whole, if you, I don't know if you've ever seen the civil rights movement. They had I am a man, just holding a sign and keep walking because they were being treated as if they were not a full person. So the approach, meaning competing, I'm important, so I'm going to push. Does that make sense? Okay, and forgive me for going too long on a few things. So collaborating is when we put effort into communicating. And this doesn't have to be 3 hours of talking. It could be a simple conversation, but you're bringing up your need and you're patient enough to hear what the other person's need is to try to come up with solutions. Do you remember those 5 skills I brought up in the beginning? One of them was, can I make a group-based decision? But that has to be based on what? Options, right? So we have to create a situation where we take the time to listen. And if you're that idea of I'm angry right now, so maybe I leave the situation, I diffuse, I de-escalate, and then I say, hey, on Friday, do you mind if we just go out to lunch or we go on a walk and we just talk through some of these things? And we may not make any decisions, but we take steps towards coming up with some kind of resolution. So don't expect it to happen immediately. I think about people come into mediation with me. I remember I was helping with a marriage. I'm not a therapist, but they were talking through these conflicts. And I was these issues have been going on for probably like 10 years. So one mediation session of 3 hours is not going to resolve 10 years. But we could snip at it, right? There was some listening. So there was a beginning of collaboration. It was guided collaboration. So pros and cons. You build relationships, like Julie was saying, in terms of compromise. You're showing respect. Like, I care about this relationship enough that I'm going to try to talk. I'm going to try to zip my lips and just listen to what you're saying. You don't do that with everybody. You don't have the time, capacity, and energy to do that with every conflict. But there are things in your life, I'm guessing, maybe I'm just projecting that from myself, but there are things in my life that I need to put the time into, relationships that really matter to me, that they're going to take a little bit more time. But I have to have enough trust, and we have to have decent communication skills. And we have to be de-escalated also to be able to have that conversation. And then ideal conditions, like the whack-a-mole, the issue keeps popping up. You know it's something you have to address on a deeper level. You try to avoid it, you try to accommodate, you try to compromise, you even try to compete, and it just doesn't go away. So sometimes you can do it alone. Again, like as a mediator, I've sometimes been there to help be like, be quiet, let the other person talk. You can write down your questions, but you have some guidelines and rules when you do it. It's an important enough issue. You are not going over everything, and both parties have to be somewhat cooperative and the power balanced. So, sorry, the formatting got off, but this is kind of a last thing, and I'll actually send this presentation so you can look at it more fully if you want. These were just questions to ask yourself over time. Like when you're thinking about a conflict you have, like, is this one simple or complex? Are the people already like stressed? Is it super escalated? Is it important to both people? If it's not important to the other person, you're going to have to make some decisions, right? If they refuse collaboration, you're like, okay, like, am I willing as a gift to accommodate? Am I willing to show a little bit of respect to compromise? Or is it like simply, I don't want to deal with it right now. I'm too stressed and I'm going to delay it, whatever. Time. How often have you seen parents, like, have you ever gone to like Disneyland and you've seen like parents being like, like they're like trying to resolve this big thing that suddenly exploded, and the kid's upset, and there's not enough time and it's not the right situation. So it's okay to say, you know what? I'm not okay with what happened. When we get home or tomorrow morning, we're going to talk about it and we're going to come up with, the consequence of that. But it's okay. It's not weak to have a plan for how and when you're going to address it. That doesn't have to be right at that moment. And then, is there enough trust? Trust is a spectrum. I should not be bearing my soul or committing to someone that I don't know at all. I like little litmus tests, and then I can kind of build up some kind of trust with someone. And then, do both sides have decent communication skills? Hilarious. It wasn't hilarious in the moment, but the wife in a mediation was saying, it's really scary when my husband raises his voice and I feel very threatened. And guess what he did? He slams his hands on the table and he's like, I do not raise my voice. And I said, I just said, I'm actually not I don't feel comfortable. Like, we're going to take a break, right? But it was just funny. Like, there's different communication skills. And so I like broke the people. Like we went into 2 rooms and, had a chat. But again, are there decent communication skills? And is the person in a state to be able to talk through things? And then, have you created a situation where people would actually want to share? Have you offered collaboration, but in the end, you're just going to decide anyway? Do you ever do that with your kids? You're like, let's talk about what we want to do. And then at the end, mom or dad just decides, and they're like, why did I even tell you what I really want? And now you just go and make another decision. That's super disrespectful, right? We feel that with spouses or, partners, and then we also feel that with our kids and friends. Don't pretend to collaborate and then switch it up and compete or do something else, right? Don't do that. And then, how important is the relationship? All right. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I laughed. So I grew up in California, and my orthodontist, who was kind of like a Zen master, like really like he was super peaceful guy, he had on his wall, I have braces, and the last thing I want is my orthodontist saying, don't increase the force, increase the time. You're like, I don't want these braces on any longer than I need them. But I remember that comment because sometimes we want this done. The conflict is really frustrating and it's kind of wearing at my soul. So I want to do something quickly to make it go away. Again, reflect, study it out. See over time what your options are. Buy time. Maybe it's Tuesday today and you do something that really makes me angry, but we're super busy. So, hey, Friday night, let's go out. Let's talk about this, right? That's buying a little time to do something better and try something different. So a different approach. So my last thing, I just wanted to ask you to think about what's driving your conflicts. What's fueling it? What are my needs? What are your needs? There's usually there's some need behind it. Remember Maslow's the pyramid? Am I, competing? Am I like wanting significance? Do I not feel like I belong? Whatever those are, be clear with yourself first, and then you're gonna listen to somebody else and see if they can explain to you what's going on. And then again, with the needs, and then what's a new approach? Be honest. Every time this certain topic comes up with my kid or, my spouse, this is how I usually react. And I'm guessing you know how it usually plays out. Do you like the result? If you like it, great. Keep doing that. But if you don't like the result, don't expect something different to come out. Like you're going to have, sometimes it feels odd, but try out something new. So, and then if you see that last, this is just a conflict styles assessment. The United States Institute of Peace has tons of resources like these that I'm sharing with you. But they have, again, it's just a little simple assessment to give you a feel for how you usually deal with conflict. So I like to just think of a specific area of my life because we act differently in different situations. Like if you put me back into my family of origin, I might have a different conflict style than if you put me as the mom of my kids, right? So just be context specific. So I hope there's something that helped you today that can help you think through how you're dealing with things. And I know I didn't cover everything that we talked about with the questions, but it's something to don't be afraid. But like Susu was saying with her initial quote, conflict is an opportunity to create connection. And the more tools you have, the less fear you have going into it. And so that's what I've hoped I've showed you a little bit of that. And if you have any interest, this is I'm not used to even talking about this. So I have Raising Mediators and then Conflict Fluent was super scary to write because I'm actually very personal about my conflict learning journey, but it's about these 5 approaches. And I kind of put them in the context of my life and how I learned a little bit about them. But thank you.
Wow. Woo! Whose head is just where do I start? What do I do? I was thinking of all these past things and all these things that we're in the middle of. So, as Emily said, if you have to leave because you planned for a certain amount of time, please do. If you would like to stay to ask not specific, my child, blah, 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 and you go into a 5-minute description, we can't have time for that today, unfortunately. But Emily was kind enough to share her contact information, and maybe you can reach out that way. Do you have something that you want clarification on or something that you want to bring out? Julie. What do you do when you want to avoid something and a kid wants to engage?
What I would say, and I've noticed this even when I'm until you acknowledge the message, people tend to keep repeating it. So you may not need to engage it, but you need to acknowledge it and be like, it sounds like you're really concerned about this. I'm so sorry, I'm in the middle of this. When would be a good time for us to kind of revisit it? So avoidance would be you don't say anything, right? But you do need to acknowledge, because people will keep coming at you with the message, or they'll take it that you don't care. Yeah. 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 A human right? So she's competing with you. Yeah. I think I think actually the pool analogy, it's actually the edge of the pool is firmness, if that makes sense. It's not just personal strength. It's like I acknowledge that you really would like, your independence, but in our home, this is how we do things. So you have a boundary. Yeah.
Any other quick question? Wow. So you've got really great opportunities to work on conflict. You have November and Thanksgiving and exams and winter break and lots of time at home with your kids. So chew on it now. You have 2.5 weeks to chew on it now so that you take opportunities. And instead of fearing them, I remember when I was learning love and logic, I'm like, oh, I just can't wait to that moment when I get to say, I love you too much to argue, honey. Give me a hug. And, I was just waiting. So just wait expectantly, but be ready. Have a plan. It doesn't have to be we've got wildfires, what do I do if my house is burning? It's my house is burning with this conflict that's not getting resolved. Think about the things that are eating at you, that you get tired of dealing with every single week, and have a plan before Thanksgiving. Who is willing to give that a try? You don't get to come to a PIN presentation and walk out and go, that was really great. Look at all my notes that I took, and I got to sit and have fun. No. As you were so gracious to say, we know each one of you cares deeply. Caring deeply is the first step. You have to put things into practice to create changes. And change, everyone wants the change that happens on the other side of effort. You have to put in the effort. You're leading the ship, the bus, the boat, whatever. You're leading it with your spouse if you're lucky to have someone who's working alongside of you. Your rest of your team. So go forth, be brave, be bold, connect. And we will see you back here in February. Look at our website. If you don't have a bookmark already, grab 1 or 10. Give them to all of your neighbors. Stick them in your, if you're at the bus stop, hand them out at the bus stop, hand them out in the PTCO meeting, hand them out at the Scouts, wherever, book club, hand them out. Bring a friend. Next time in February, it's about perfectionism.